Everybody, Andrew Cuneo here. It's been a while since I've made a constructed video. I have actually been playing a decent amount of Alchemy lately, and this is the deck I've come to like the best. We're about to get a new set of Alchemy cards, so I haven't been able to incorporate any of those yet, but going into those changes, this is the deck I currently like. So it's a dinosaur slash spawning pod deck, which uses a lot of Alchemy only stuff or Alchemy modified stuff. So if you haven't really played Alchemy, you might not be familiar with a lot of these cards, but it's I think, a pretty cool deck. So it sort of the driving force behind the design of the whole deck is Spawning Pod, where this is a callback to Birthing Pod, but you save a lot of mana because where Birthing Pod was like 4 mana and then 2 mana to use, although you could spend Phyrexian mana to get discounts. This is just 3 and 1. But the downside is rather than getting to search your deck for a creature with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacked creature, you have to seek. So seek means that the game is going to choose at random for you a card that meets that restriction. And that means that the way you want to design your deck when you're trying to use this card is you want to have just specific creatures at each mana cost on the curve. So I've got a bunch of dinosaurs. Etali, standard legal card at 7. Trumpeting Carnosaur at 6. Trumpeting Carnosaur, also the channel discard ability is kind of important in this deck because this deck doesn't have a ton of instant speed interaction, but this gives you a little bit more. Then Palani's Hatcher, which is probably the most disappointing card to have to include in the deck, but there just weren't any good 5-drops because you're looking for something that's going to have like a come into play ability, so you're not going to feel bad if you wind up sacking it immediately, like if you have multiple pods out and you're trying to chain up to Etali, or just, you pod this out and then next turn you're going to pod it away to get Trumpeting Carnosaur. You want it to be something that you're not going to be disappointed if it doesn't stick around. So one other option is Ogier, which isn't a dinosaur, so it'd be fine for it not to be a dinosaur. But this thing, the fact that this does give your dinosaurs haste does come up where, if you're giving Trumpeting Carnosaur or Etali haste, it's a really big deal. And also, I have 4 Intrepid Paleontologists, so you do cast things out of your graveyard, dinosaurs out of your graveyard. Now we get to one of the first of the Alchemy cards, this card Wingbane Vantasaur. I'm kind of the belief that it's pretty hard for 4-drops to be better than Sheoldred in Standard or in Alchemy. Arguably Rusko is better in Alchemy than Sheoldred. I'm not going to say Wingbane Vantasaur is better than Sheoldred, but it is actually quite good. So what it does is it's a 4-mana 4/5, and when you cast it, you get to put either Savage Stomp or Naturalize into your hand. And obviously Savage Stomp is much better if you have a dinosaur in play, and this is a dinosaur. It also has Reach, which is relevant some of the time for holding back, various small flyers that people do actually play in Alchemy, like Oracle of the Alpha or whatever that 1/1 lifelink flyer in black is that takes cards from your hand. Also, being able to get Naturalize is a pretty big deal. There are a lot of things that you actually want to be able to naturalize in Alchemy. I'll get back to the removal in a second. I have 2 Tranquil Frillbacks in my main deck, it's a little bit awkward with Pod because I have a mix at 3, but at lower points on the curve, I think you just have to tolerate that you're not going to have only 1 card because you can only play a max of 4 copies of a card. Tranquil Frillback is in the deck because, like I said, being able to blow up artifacts and enchantments is actually pretty important in Alchemy. When we get into some of the games, we'll probably see that come up. And being able to gain life is obviously nice. Also, being able to exile people's graveyards is pretty important. You can do, I know people try Insidious Roots in Standard. You can do much more powerful things with Insidious Roots in Alchemy. And it's a little bit awkward, exiling someone's graveyard when they have Insidious Roots in play obviously isn't necessarily good. But if you have 5 mana, you can blow up the Insidious Roots and exile their graveyard. And because of the order it happens on the card, they don't get the triggers. Which is, like, this card is kind of like a 1-card knockout to that deck. Which, sometimes they can rebuild, but you can they can be really well set up, and you can basically put them back to 0 with this card. Another Alchemy-only card, Scalespeaker Shepherd. And this is another reason that the deck is so heavily focused on dinosaurs, is because this gives you a cost reduction for all of your dinosaurs, in addition to seeking a dinosaur from the spellbook. I have to say that, like, one of the reasons I like Alchemy is I think all the spellbook cards are quite interesting, and a lot of the seeking cards are quite interesting because of how they make you build their decks. I know a lot of people don't like Alchemy because I think originally it was because they hated the kind of the economy implications of Alchemy. And I kind of get that. And then there were also, when they first designed Alchemy cards, I don't know that they really had a good idea for what cards would work and what wouldn't. But I think the most successful designs are all of the cards that have to do with spell books and seeking. Like, I think that stuff's actually interesting. The things that are like you're perpetually changing the size of the cards isn't interesting at all. But anyway, this card has a quite powerful spell book. Ancient Imperiosaur is actually one of the worst creatures in it. Although I will say, if you have Palani's Hatcher in play and you get to convoke out a giant Ancient Imperiosaur, you win the game very quickly. Burning Sun's Avatar is okay. It does have a nice property that, like, it's a 6-drop that you play it, you get the 3 damage, and then you can just pod it into Etali. So, you know, it fits with pod pretty well. Carnage Tyrant is also fine. There aren't a lot of things that people play in Alchemy that can kill Carnage Tyrant, but you also aren't necessarily going to win the game just by having a 7 power trampler. Charging Monstrosaur, I actually tend to get a lot when it's one of the options, just because it usually fits into your curve pretty well if you played Scalespeaker Shepherd on turn 3. Etali, it's a card I have in my deck, so obviously just getting free copies out of a spellbook is pretty great. Ghalta is occasionally really good because you can sometimes play it for 2 mana, but it's kind of a win more card usually. Gishath. This Gishath I get sometimes, and it's a little bit important that if you want to have the option of getting Gishath, you give yourself access to white mana. There's a few ways to get white mana in the deck, but you're not necessarily going to be able to cast Gishath when you get to 8 mana unless you have a white source. Quartzwood Crashers, sometimes you get it because it's like, it's an impactful 5, but it's certainly nothing special. Register Alpha is a much better 5. It's kind of like a different version of Palani's Hatcher that you can also get in the spellbook. So that's like a second card in the spellbook that's just in my deck. So that's obviously a pretty nice option. Ripjaw Raptor, it's definitely a worse card than the Wingbane Vantasaur, but it's not horrible. And if you use Wingbane Vantasaur to get Savage Stomps and then you have a Raptor and you're Savage Stomping, you're getting to draw cards. Like, that's kind of the idea with the Enrage mechanic, is you would use your creatures to fight. Not great, but a decent option, and also it's only 4 mana, so sometimes you want something a little bit cheaper. Shifting Ceratops. This is a card that when it was in Standard was actually fairly heavily played, but I would say it's not at all well suited to Alchemy. Like, Pro Blue can't be countered just isn't a good combination of abilities for Alchemy. Like, sometimes you get it because it is, it's an impactful enough card that if it's going to fit into your curve to cast it, it might be an okay choice, but it's really not particularly well suited for Alchemy. Territorial Allosaurus, I think, is actually a better 4-drop to get from the spellbook because you do sometimes get the fight, but also not like an insanely good card. Tranquil Frillback, yet another card in the spellbook that I just have in my main deck, so that's one that's obviously pretty good to get a lot of the time, although it's a very situational card, so use your judgment. Wrenn and Realmbreaker's Avatar, I think, is the worst card in the spellbook. I don't think I've ever gotten this and cast it. You should almost never pick this one. And then Zacama, I actually get Zacama somewhat frequently. Yet again, this is one of the ones where you need to have a source of white mana to be able to cast it. The Shepherd is not going to fix any colored mana issues for you. There's a few sources of white mana, so you need to kind of plan ahead if you're going to choose this. But Zacama is obviously, if you can afford to cast it, an incredibly powerful card. So in games when you've got a lot of mana or you think the game's going to go long, this is actually a pretty good choice to get. So that's probably the most complicated card to talk about. Probably Spawning Pod is the most complicated card to build your deck around. So that's, I think, the end of the Alchemy only cards in the deck. At the 2-drop slot, I have a lot of mana creatures, and those are kind of interesting. Like, the Paleontologist gives you a way to fight people's graveyards, which does matter in Alchemy sometimes. And this ability that if you exile dinosaurs from your own graveyard, you can recast them, actually does come up with this deck. That's a real ability. And it taps for mana of any color, so that is one of the ways that you can cast the white dinosaurs from the Scalespeaker Shepherd's spellbook. 2 copies of Ruby Daring Tracker. This one might seem a little bit weird because it's a standard legal card that I don't think anybody plays in standard, but I found it to be pretty good. I would be playing more copies if it wasn't a legend. But it's good both in the sense that, like, it has haste, so a lot of the times it will allow you to play like 2 mana creatures on turn 3, or if you. And basically, the turn you cast it effectively only costs 1 mana, and it's going to ramp you for the rest of the game, that's just a really nice card. Also, when it attacks, if you have a 4-power or greater creature, it gets +2/+2, so it attacks as a 3/4. You're going to have 4-power creatures in play with this deck a lot of the time, so it's actually just a pretty efficient attacking creature. There's like a different red-green dinosaur that's a 2/3. It's like Huatli something from Ixalan. I think is the name of it. Okay, it's not Huatli's. I don't know the name of it. It's an uncommon dinosaur. I have not tried it. It's a 2/3 that if you pay extra mana, you get to fight or punch with a dinosaur. I think that Ruby Daring Tracker is a much better card than that. Another mana creature, A-Llanowar Loamspeaker. So this is a standard legal card, but it's been changed for Alchemy. That's the only card I have like that in my deck. The change is that instead of making 3/3 elementals, it makes 4/4 elementals, which is a pretty big upgrade. Also taps from mana of any one color. For a long time, I played with Bramble Familiars instead because you could cast Fetch Quest, the 7-mana adventure part of Bramble Familiar, and this, the deck has Etalis and Trumpeting Carnosaurs in it, so there are good targets for Fetch Quest. But there's a few problems with Bramble Familiar. First of all, it doesn't tap for mana of any color. Also, it's a 2/2 instead of being a 1/3, which I think it's better for your mana creatures to be 1/3s in Alchemy because there are red decks that just play like a lot of copies of Shock and Shock equivalent cards. So I think for the purposes of fighting against those decks, you'd prefer your mana creatures not to die on turn 2 to their 1-mana spell. So it's better to be a 1/3. Also, and this is the big thing, when I get to the lands, when I realized that Restless Ridgeline works really well with Loamspeaker was kind of what sold me on playing 4 copies of both. So Restless Ridgeline is like a generally just solid creature land. It's nothing special. But if you animate the creature lands with Loamspeaker, they still get the ability. So, in spots where you didn't want to spend 4 mana to animate the Restless Ridgeline, you can effectively spend 2 mana. Like you're tapping this and you're using the Ridgeline. So I guess instead of 5 mana, you're spending 2. And you're making the Ridgeline just into a 4/4, but it still has this triggered ability. So like if you have 2 Loamspeakers and 2 Ridgelines out, you can just tap both your Loamspeakers to animate both Ridgelines, and you're effectively attacking for 12. And then you're untapping both of the Ridgelines. So it leads to actually like really some pretty explosive damage out of your creature lands. I think if for whatever reason you decide you don't like having Restless Ridgeline in your deck, then you'd be less inclined to play Loamspeaker and vice versa. Like if you didn't want to play Loamspeaker, you might not want to play Ridgeline. I think those two kind of go together. And I've actually tried Bramble Familiars a lot, and in place of Restless Ridgelines, I tried the new Surveil land a lot, and there's also another Alchemy-only land called Captivating Crossroads, which is kind of like a pathway that works sort of like a tap land some of the time. I think that this is the best configuration. Another card that I guess is Alchemy only, this is from the Lord of the Rings set. So it's just a 1-drop mana creature, which is a pretty big deal in any sort of standard or standard adjacent format. The ability that your legendary spells can't be countered doesn't really matter very often. I do have Cavern of Souls in my deck to make dinosaurs uncounterable, and also just because it's a good mana fixing card, given that my deck is mostly dinosaurs. There are not very many counters that people play in Alchemy. The can't be countered thing matters, but occasionally people do play with No More Lies. That's the one card that shows up somewhat. So it's kind of nice to be able to get your things uncounterable. Although Delighted Halfling, really, there aren't very many legendaries. It's really just Etali and, like, I guess, Ruby. And there's a couple that you can get off of Scalespeaker Shepherd. But for the most part, this is just going to be tapping for colorless mana. One thing that you may think, wow, that's a lot of mana creatures to have in a deck. Like, I've got, I guess, 14. That's a kind of common way to build a deck with spawning pod / birthing pod, is you don't want to just have a ton of lands. You want to have mana creatures that you can, get them out, get mana from them when you need them, and then pod them into better things as the game goes on. So I only have 24 lands in my deck, which is certainly like a really low number of lands to play in a standard deck where you're trying to play like 5, 6, and 7 drops. But obviously with 14 mana creatures, things work out a little bit differently. And also Scalespeaker Shepherd is functionally a mana creature for your expensive spells. So in some way, it's like I have 18 mana creatures in my deck. That covers most of the main deck. I do have 2 removal spells in my deck, Abrade and Witchstalker Frenzy. I wanted a little bit more interaction. You really don't have very much interaction in this deck. It's mostly coming from Savage Stomps, a little bit from Trumpeting Carnosaur, a little bit from things you get off of Scalespeaker Shepherd, and a little bit from things you just hit from your opponent's deck with Etali. The things that Abrade is good at, Abrade's a pretty good card against Rusco. Like, obviously, you're only killing half of the Rusco, but you get to pick whichever half is more important at the time. Blow that half up, which is nice. Witchstalker Frenzy, the main reason to play it in this deck is that Sheoldred is really good against the red-green dinosaur deck. It's a pretty big problem if you can't get it off the board. It's not super popular, but it does show up some in Alchemy, in part because it's really good with the One Ring, and some people build their deck around the One Ring and Sheoldred. Unlike like mono red, if you're coming from standard, where people play 4 Witchstalker Frenzies and it's just a really efficient card, this deck does not always get enough attacking creatures that Witchstalker Frenzy gets to the point that it's really cheap, which is kind of one of the reasons not to play a ton of them. I will say that when the new Alchemy set comes out, which is it may already be out by the time you're watching this, it's right about to come out. There's a new card coming out called Shove Aside, which is, it's basically Strangle, but if you were on the draw for the game, it's an instant. I think it's always a sorcerer, but it says it has flash, so you can cast it as an instant. And I'm going to be trying converting all of these to Shove Asides, or both of these to Shove Asides, and then when we get to the sideboard, I'm going to have more Shove Asides in my sideboard. Because I think that one of the things that this deck wanted was just another strong 1 mana card, and I'm hoping that's going to be the card. Looking at the lands, there are a few other options you could play. I think it's called Commercial Ridge, maybe? Whatever the red-green... Commercial District. Commercial Ridge doesn't make any sense. You could play this one. I don't think you want to have a ton of tapped lands in your deck. And I think Restless Ridgeline is better, which is why I'm not playing it. There's also this one, which it's like a 5-color pathway that comes into play tapped early on in the game if you were on the play. I have played with this one some. It's okay. This is not a deck that really wants to have tap lands in it at all. The Ridgeline is getting in there because I think it's just a very good card with the rest of the deck. But you really don't want to play tap lands usually in decks that are playing a lot of mana creatures to ramp, because your goal is to sort of like accelerate into bigger and bigger spells each turn, and tap lands is kind of the antithesis of that. I only have 3 Cavern of Souls. The Cavern of Souls is a little bit awkward in this deck because your creatures aren't all of only one type. You mostly want to name Dinosaur because those are your more expensive cards, and the only reason that you're really playing Cavern of Souls is No More Lies. Also, you're playing it just because it fixes your colors to an extent. Like, if you have Cavern of Souls, you can, mostly put it on Dinosaur, and it's going to allow you to cast your spells. But sometimes you might need it to put it on, your mana creatures to be able to play them on an early turn in the game. And there, it's a little bit awkward. There's not a ton of overlap. You're just going to have to pick based on what you have in your hand. Like, Druid covers these two, and this one. Human covers this one, and this one, and this one. Halfling Citizen, if you needed to play Delighted Halfling, that's the only colored mana you're going to get from the Cavern of Souls. So these can be awkward, but I think it's better than just playing more basics. And every once in a while, the uncounterable thing does matter. All right, moving on to the sideboard. Lithomantic Barrage, obviously, it's good against white and blue creatures. Like, there aren't a ton of white and blue planeswalkers, but this is fine. Melt Through, this is going to be replaced with Shove-Asides when that becomes legal. So if you don't know, it's basically shock that the damage doesn't go away. It doesn't get cleaned up, so it's kind of like Wither. The reason I'm playing this is I wanted a 1-mana card I could board in mostly against mono red, like Monastery Swift Spear kind of things. And Melt Through just kills Monastery Swift Spear through prowess. It doesn't necessarily kill it the turn you play it, but you're always going to kill the Swift Spear eventually. This is another Alchemy only card, Cast into the Fire. So the Boros Convoke deck is popular in Alchemy, and it's arguably better than it is in Standard. Even though it doesn't use a ton of Alchemy-only cards, it's just... in some ways, like, Alchemy is a lower power format than Standard, and Boros Convoke, it gets a minor upgrade, but I think it's probably better positioned. Anyway, Exile, you can deal 1 damage to each of up to 2 creatures, so against, like, Resolute Reinforcements, or they play, like, some amount of, like, 1-drops that only have 1 toughness, so sometimes you get to kill 2 actual cards, sometimes you just kill Resolute Reinforcements. Not great against the deck, but I think it's good enough to have a copy. Exile and Artifact, this is an answer to the One Ring. A lot of the times I don't really love having kind of reactive answers to the One Ring in my deck, but if somebody's deck is really focused around the One Ring, you can certainly board it in. Also, there are some pretty good just straight up artifact decks in Alchemy where you might want it. 2 more Frillbacks. Like I said, I think Tranquil Frillback is really well positioned. Also, I do board these in if I'm playing against, like, mono red. There's a mono red burn deck in Alchemy that uses some cards that are not standard legal, and one of them is an enchantment it's good to be able to blow up, called Fiery Conscription. 1 Soul Guide Lantern. This is both against Insidious Roots decks, which, like I said, against Insidious Roots decks, it's not necessarily a good thing to be able to blow up their graveyard. It is a good thing to be able to blow up their graveyard before they have Insidious Roots in play. So you need to be a little bit careful with this one. There are also, like, reanimating Atraxa strategies that people try sometimes. 2 copies of Wrenn and Realmbreaker. So one of the things that is really hard for this deck to beat is Sunfall. So I was looking for a planeswalker that would give me some resilience against Sunfall. And this is what I'm trying. I would say it's not great, but, like, it sort of does what you want. Not super sold on this one in the sideboard, but it's my current plan against Sunfall, and also just against black decks that have, like, a ton of 1-for-1 removal. Because there isn't a ton of... there are some removal spells in Alchemy that are really good that don't hit planeswalkers, like Porcine Portent. So people don't actually play a lot of things that can actually just kill planeswalkers directly. So having planeswalkers is good. This is not a great planeswalker, but it's kind of the best available for the role. There is one other card I tried called Palantir of Orthanc, which... Why is Rita telling me I spelled it wrong? What's going on here? I don't know what. Maybe because I couldn't type the accent mark? I don't know. This would be a pretty good thing against Sunfall type decks. The problem is Porcine Portent. Most of the people that have Sunfall also have Porcine Portent, so they're actually pretty good at getting artifacts and enchantments off the board. So this card isn't actually as resilient as you would like it to be in the matchups where you'd be boarding it in. This is a pretty good card, but I think that Wrenn and Realmbreaker is better because of specifically the fact that this is pretty easy to get off the board. Another Alchemy-only dinosaur this time. So this one is, I think it's sort of intended to go in more of like a straightforward beatdown dinosaur deck. The important part on this card is that when you attack with it, you can pay 3 and it'll deal 1 damage to each creature and each planeswalker, which is a way to get rid of the various X1s against the Boros Convoke deck, basically. I also usually board this in against like mono red beatdown decks because of this enrage ability that makes all your other dinosaurs get bigger. If somebody's forced to 2-for-1 themselves out of a red deck to get this off the board, all of your other dinosaurs are just going to be gigantic for the rest of the game, which is problematic for people. 2 more Witchstalker Frenzies. This is basically just to get Sheoldreds off the board. And then 1 copy of Lukka, which is a standard legal planeswalker. This is another one of the cards that I was kind of trying to be good against Sunfall. I don't think this one's good enough. But the -4 ability that it just kills a bunch of creatures if you have a giant creature in play. It's the reason it's still on my sideboard, to give me something against, like, another kind of sweeper effect against Boros Convoke. I would say this is probably the card in my sideboard that it would be easiest to convince me to switch to something else. I like the idea of this card. I've always kind of liked it, but I have to say it's really not actually a very good card. I mean, it's not horrible, but it doesn't really have any role where it like clearly shines. All right, that's the deck. I'm going to play a couple of matches, and hopefully we'll get to see some of the stuff I talked about in action. Would like it if my hand had a little bit more mana in it. Because if you go turn 2, play a mana creature, turn 3, play a land, and spawning pod, it's like you do pod away your mana creature sometimes, but that's not really the start you want to have. I want to name human, I guess. It's way better to go like turn 2 mana creature, turn 3, 2 more mana creatures, or a Wingbane Vantasaur. Yes, I'm going to play pod and pod this away. I think that if they had a go for the throat type card, they would have already killed the Ruby, because they know my hand. So they had to know, like, if I didn't draw a land there, I wasn't even going to be able to do anything. Alright, so we'll get a Scalespeaker Shepherd here. So that was 80% of the time I was going to get Scalespeaker Shepherd there. There was a 20% chance I would get the Tranquil Frillback, which would have been a disappointment. What do we draft in here? I would get Tranquil Frillback if I didn't already have one in my hand. I think I'll just get Territorial Allosaurus. So the way that these spellbook cards work, your opponent does not get to know what you drafted. Wingbane Vantasaur is written in a different way that's a little bit weird, so they actually do get to know what card you chose. It's possible the opponent has a 3-mana counter called Saruman's Trickery. Alright. Not really sure what their deck is trying to do. I guess they're probably like some sort of Rusko-based control deck. One thing that's a little bit annoying with pod is if you have creatures that comes into play abilities, you pod it as sorcery, so if the ability goes on the stack, your opponent could possibly respond and kill your creature before you get to pot it away. I guess I'll go with Savage Stomp for this one. It's a little bit hard to know. It's like if they had Rusko in their deck, I think they would have played it last turn. Oh, okay, I was supposed to get Naturalize. This is probably a Reanimator deck. Yeah, had I gotten either the second Frillback or the Naturalize, it would be in much better shape. I guess I'm gonna get Palani's Hatcher, just play a second pod. So there is a choice when you're making this specific pod maneuver where you can either pod post-combat and then you attack for 1 more damage, or you can pod pre-combat and you're like, you have 1 more egg hatched. I think it's generally better to pod pre-combat and hatch the extra egg, but there might be specific game states where that's not the case. Yeah, this is definitely a Reanimated Traxa deck. Which, Cruelty of Gix is a pretty awkward card for my deck because it's like they can reanimate my own giant dinosaurs with Cruelty of Gix. Alright, so I've got I guess a 50-50 shot of hitting another Paleontologist. Probably the best I can do. I didn't have Paleontologists. Now I'm probably in a world of hurt. I think if I had hit a Paleontologist there, I would have actually been in pretty good shape. Man, if I'd just known to pick a Tranquil Frillback. This also would have been a lot easier. It's not completely over, but it's not looking good. They have 11. Ooh, they're able to just, they're going to just be able to wipe the board by pitching the Savage Stomp. Yeah, that's... Because I no longer even have 5-drops in my deck. I potted both of the Hatchers into play. That is one thing that you have to keep track of if you're going to play a pod deck like this, is like what's still left in your deck. And I was out of 5s. Also, I was just dead by so many different ways. Alright, so this is the matchup that the Soul Guide Lantern is mostly for. I'm also going to board in these Frillbacks because they hit Cruelty of Gix and they can exile graveyards. So that's all nice. I don't think I need Abrade at all. It's possible they have Shieldrids, which would be annoying, but I think I'm going to just risk it there. Yeah, I guess I'm going to trim one of my mana creatures, probably the Delighted Halfling. Because they had ill-timed explosions, which having this many mana creatures when your opponent has sweepers is pretty annoying to play against, or to play. So now that I know kind of how their deck works, I'm going to be... I'm going to tend to pick Naturalize there. I don't care about any of this stuff. Honestly, these all seem kind of bad. I'll just take a Shifting Ceratops. And it's on red-black. It is possible that, I guess it's actually likely that they have Crucius in their deck. But they don't seem to have it in their hand. I lied. Shifting Ceratops is great. Get in there. Beastly Ceratops. We are probably just going to get to the point where they're just hard casting Etalis, which is going to make the game pretty random. Probably want to play Sauron's Ransom this turn. I think I'm going to hit them and probably play Pod post-combat. I'm ahead 2 damage, but behind 1 egg hatching. But I think that their life total is low enough that it was worth it to do it like that. I do also have, I have 2 Restless Ridgelines, which I do not have the mana to activate both of them. But just them being on a low life total is pretty good for me. This is one of those spots where if they had a instant speed removal, they could have played the removal spell before I I'm able to get the hatcher. Of course, they can also just kill the hatcher, and I'm just going to have a bunch of useless eggs. Hopefully they can't kill the hatcher. The eggs aren't 100% useless. I can start hatching them into, like, Delighted Halflings with a pod, but that is a slow way to go about things. As I said before, because the Vantasaur is written as a modal card, they know that I have this Naturalize and Savage Stomp because I'm making a choice when I cast it. This is one of those spots where I like to try to trick people by, like, they're probably going to think that the face down pile is better than the go for the throat and a land. I bet I can get them to take 2 lands. Oh, I couldn't. Wow. Just the go for the throat was enough for them? I would have thought that they would be looking to do better than that. Guess not. They're going to reanimate a hatcher. They are. I'm just going to save time and let those eggs become tapped. Get in there, Delighted Halfling. This is another hatcher. These hatchers, I can't get away from them. Come on, Paleontologist. They have an instant speed removal spell here. They can kill the Paleontologist before I get to cast the Hatcher. Which I wouldn't like that, but so the cards work. Yeah, they should have played the go for the throat already. Alright, I'm just gonna leave my mana untapped so I can Paleontologist at end of turn. Not too concerned about my life total. I can take a hit for sure. It would be a pretty big hit. Sorcerer's Spyglass. I do obviously have Naturalize and Tranquil Frillback, but I want to make sure I get to use my mana. And I don't really want to have to Naturalize the Spyglass, because I might want to just play the Frillback and use it to blow the Spyglass up. Can they name lands? It's been so long since someone's played this card. Yeah, they can. They could name my Restless Ridgelines, which I think it really doesn't matter what they name, because I'm going to almost definitely blow the Spyglass up. But I think they maybe would want to name Pod. Also, this is like the worst art for this card. The weird, like, bendy periscope that just denies the laws of physics. I hate it. Are we really supposed to believe that this merfolk has like a fiber optic cable periscope, or that they've somehow lined the inside of their periscope with mirrors and it's going to work? There's no way. It's completely unrealistic. I really don't like it. I don't like it at all. Alright, so yet again, I've burned through all my hatchers. It's a little bit weird. What did they name? Pod. How many Vantasaurs have I burned through? 2. I think that this was better than just leaving mana for the Paleontologist up. The scary thing is, I'm sure they have a bunch of Etalis in their deck that they could just draw and cast. That one's less scary. Ooh, it's a Rusco. They do have Ruscos. Okay. Equation has been changed. Forgot that card existed. Do I want to pod? Hatcher away? I actually just want the eggs to start hatching. I guess instead I'm just gonna not attack. No, there's no way this game is gonna last long enough that all these eggs are gonna hatch, so I'm gonna pod 1 to halfling this turn. Both to thin a halfling out of my deck, because it's a pretty bad draw at this point, and also just to give me the option of potting into a 2-drop next turn, or just having a little bit of mana. So they do have Rusco. I don't think I can afford to have Abrade in my deck against them, though. There just aren't enough targets. This hand's pretty close to being a mulligan on the draw. It's pretty slow. I don't love mulliganing against somebody, though, that I know has a bunch of discard in the deck. They probably have 4 of that Phantasmal Extraction card. Also, I do have a lot of good top decks. Any of my 1 or 2 mana creatures is going to be a great draw. And I have, I think it would be 14 is what I said. Please don't change the equation. Come on, Tranquil Frillback. That is the one I wanted. Give myself some insurance against a Cruelty of Gix. I think they're going to take the face down pile. Not wild about them being able to play Rusco this turn, but I will just blow up the clock right away, I think. And I guess gain 4 life. Graveyards don't have anything relevant in them yet. Kind of like I traded with Rusko on like a somewhat fair basis. I spent 4 mana. I blew up half of the Rusko, and we both got a 3/3, and I've gained 4 life. The fact that they're going to get that trigger is probably better for them long term. Guess I'm going to start jamming things. It's kind of annoying that this is probably going to die and then come right back out of my graveyard. Difficulty of Gix, but maybe not. It's lived so far. I didn't attack first just because it's possible that I hit Palani's Hatcher or... which mana do they have? Like 5? I think I definitely want to split the land in the Carnosaur. I think they would definitely take the Shieldred Carnosaur pile. I think this is the best split for me. And just hope that they don't have enough mana to deploy all this stuff. Anyway, I was saying I played the Carnosaur pre-combat because I could hit Palani's Hatcher. I guess that there's no removal spell I would hit that I would cast. Because they're not in my deck. Are they pitching the Carnosaur? They pitched both cards. Whoa, what is in their hand? Turns out a Phantasmal Extraction is in their hand that is going to whiff. So they can get a card out of my graveyard. What are they going to get? The Frillback? Yeah, I guess that does something. I think it's almost guaranteed they're going to cast Etali on their turn. Given what they just discarded and what they did with their turn. So, oh no, it's just Cruelty of Gix. Okay. And they're getting their Carnosaur. I might be able to beat this. They're getting my Carnosaur. Also might be able to beat that. Yeah, it's mildly annoying. Come on, something good. Should I take the Galta and then pitch it to Crucius and choose Ambitious? That doesn't seem like a good plan. I think I'm just going to take Register Alpha. There's maybe an argument there for taking the Galta, but their deck does have a lot of go for the throat type cards. So even if I get the Galta in play, it's not necessarily going to be good. Wow. Why did they discard Shieldred and the Carnosaur? Opponent on a mull to 5. They're probably playing Boros Convoke. That's what Restless Bivouac usually means. No, this is something else. No, it is Boros Convoke. What does this card do? So they must be planning to do some sort of crafting with that, right? Oh, why would you play it? Oh, man, it really worked out bad that I chose Dinosaur. If I could, I would play Scalespeaker Shepherd and Delighted Halfling this turn. I guess I'm just going to play the Vantasaur. It's not a bad turn. I could get a Naturalize, obviously. I mean, they do have 2 artifacts, but I don't really want to Naturalize either of them. That wouldn't be bad to Naturalize. Wait a second, I could have played both of these last turn. What's wrong with me? I mean, they're probably more than one thing, but definitely didn't do that right. I don't think it's going to matter. I want to know, what are they doing with these gnomes? What kind of gnome-based plans do they have? Please explain your gnomes, opponent. I didn't even get to see what the rest of their stuff was. Alright, against them, obviously, I want to have all my Naturalize effects, so I'm going to board in my Frillbacks. Usually I board in Lithomantic Barrages. I assume that they have Knight Errant of Eos. Maybe their deck is different from what I think it is, but I don't know. I guess I'll leave Abrade in my deck. I think I'm going to board like their Boros Convoke and be prepared to be wrong. So usually against Boros Convoke, I trim a little bit of my top end, like I'll cut 1 Etali, and I'll cut a pod, and I cut Scalespeaker Shepherds, and just have different 3-drops, and then I'll also cut a Palani's Hatcher, and like I'll trim 1 of these mana creatures. And try to just be focused much more on being lower to the ground, having more interaction. Because most of the time, if you just get a Wingbane Vantasaur into play and Savage Stomp their biggest creature, the Wingbane Vantasaur is just going to be the biggest creature in play for the rest of the game. So you really just need to not die to like them swarming you with a bunch of small creatures. You don't usually need to like go all the way up to Etali. I like leaving 1 in my deck just because I'm leaving some pods, so it is a little bit powerful. But bear in mind, I took out 1 of my 5-drops, which actually, that's bad. It's bad to take out. The Palani's Hatcher is actually pretty good usually against Boros Convoke, is what I think I've decided. I kind of feel like I probably shouldn't have Lukka in my sideboard, but it's really only in my sideboard for this kind of matchup. I did just say for this kind of matchup, assuming they're Boros Convoke, even though they kind of showed a lot of indications they weren't. Well, that wasn't a very good match. Other hand that can use a little bit more land. Usually, if you have a choice between playing the Paleontologist and the Loamspeaker, and you think that the first one you play is likely to die, you want to lead on the Loamspeaker, because the Paleontologist can get pretty powerful later on in the game. Depends a little bit on what sort of deck you think you're playing against. I do have to say Reprieve is like one of the most miserable cards in Alchemy. It's a pretty big power level outlier. It's, I think, one of the best cards. This is also another very good card, but it is not on the level of Reprieve. I guess I'm pitching Witchstalker Frenzy. I'm just hoping they don't have Shielded. There's a decent chance they're about to flicker this with this thing, the dedicated doll maker. This is started out poorly and it's continuing to go poorly. Maybe if I draw a land, I got a shot. I do have a decent amount of life to work with, at least. I could have just traded with the Sheoldred. If I had more going on, I would do that, but I'm kind of hoping they just don't have anything. They definitely have something. Yeah, this game was doomed. Any of my dinosaurs even make it to the graveyard? Yeah, that one did. Alright. I'm not dead on board to them animating the land and attacking me with everything. Because, oh no, I am dead on board. The Sheoldred does not trade with the Vantasaur. They just animate their land and attack with everything. I guess I wouldn't be completely dead. I just wouldn't be in a position where I could survive. Yeah, they definitely should have attacked with Sheoldred there. I don't really know what's going on with that, but okay. Gain life, and then I'll have this to pod into another Vantasaur for next turn. Seems like they don't have a removal spell in their hand. I'm gonna have to fight through like a steady stream of porcine portents, putting out various annoying pigs that are going to be hard for me to beat. Oh, I don't even have pod anymore. I don't know why I was focused on getting pod back. What is my opponent doing? Etali. Like I said, this is a good format for Tranquil Frillback. I think I don't really want to trade Scalespeaker Shepherd with Juggernaut Peddler. Need more dinosaurs to go to the graveyard. that's not good. Sunfall is a hell of a card. I'm gonna have 2 Juggernauts at least. Alright, this is like nightmare matchup. Sunfalls and Shieldrids. It's doesn't really get any worse than that. I don't want any more Juggernauts. This card's really good. Alright, against somebody with Sunfalls and Shieldrids. So, this is where I want my Wrenn and Realmbreakers. And I don't know if I can afford to play 3 Witchstalker Frenzies here. Awkward because I guess I probably have to. I think what I'm going to take out is some mana guys. Again, because they're Sunfall, and they're not fast. My other mana creatures, I guess I'm gonna trim 1 Ruby. These mana creatures all do stuff as the game goes on, which is why I'm leaving them in my deck. Kind of want more Frillbacks. I don't know. I'm going to take Savage Stomp, or I'm going to take Naturalize almost always with the Vantasaurs, so maybe I can get by with not too many Frillbacks. Trumpeting Carnosaur doesn't do much in this matchup, but it is a 2-for-1. And it does allow me to pot up to Etali, which is something I'm very interested in. I think this matchup is a real bad matchup, and I think part of the problem is that like the options at 5 and 6 aren't particularly great. The Hatcher and Trumpeting Carnosaur don't do a ton against their deck. Which is a little bit miserable. And like Sunfall's very good against my deck. Shielded's also very good. So they have a bunch of problematic cards, and I don't really have particularly problematic cards for them. So it's not great. My main hopes are just they like stumble on mana. Alright, I was going to say, I wasn't going to attack with the Ridgeline there just because I wanted to make sure I get to cast the Carnosaur next turn. Am I getting Reprieved? Reprieve is also just a very annoying card when you've filled your deck with 5, 6, and 7 drops. There's a lot of issues with this matchup. The one thing I will say is I don't actually think that this deck that they're playing, I think lines up kind of poorly against a lot of other things in Alchemy, but it is a collection of good cards. That are particularly good against my deck. What do we get? Ooh, a Wrenn and Realmbreaker. That's a pretty nice hit. So if I minus this and they have removal spell and animate, it'll still live. So I'm going to minus.
Search past the walls of this realm.
think I'll just take Scalespeaker Shepherd. The spawning pod has the problem that they can get a pig that can destroy it. So it's not just going to sit in play. As we can see, they're very well supplied with pigs. I was hoping they would have a Shieldred there. I may have been lying when I said that. Guess I'm just going to play the Carnosaur. If I'm really lucky, I hit Witchstalker Frenzy here. If I don't hit Witchstalker Frenzy, I at least almost always hit something that can chump the Shieldred to keep the... Wrenn alive. I don't want to animate a land, just in case they play Sunfall.
Please! Buy us more time.
This is an annoying thing they get to do.
Endless rot and rebirth.
We have one card. So if it's a go for the throat and I play the Allosaurus, they'll just kill it and get to keep their Shieldred, which that's not good for me. If I have Spawning Pod, I guess I can just play Spawning Pod this turn and pod this Shepherd into Wingbane Vantasaur. That's maybe my best option. Because this way, at least if they have Reprieve or go for the throat, both of those things don't take my whole turn to get through. Seems like they don't have anything. No. And I was going to say I'll let the auto tapper do me dirty, but I have Wrenn and 7, so I'm still going to get to cast my Halfling. Alright. And they're under 1 ring protection this turn. They did have Reprieve. So I guess I played my turn right. Yay me. I don't really have a way to get the 1 ring off the board. I mean, I could Etali into something from their deck, they would do it, but it's just going to be in play for the rest of the game. So I need to pressure the life total and hope that they don't find a second Shieldred all that soon. I think they should probably just play a Porcine Portent and blow up my pod. It's possible they have better stuff in their hand to do. Why do they know I have this Palani Saturate? I guess I got it from a Wrenn and Realmbreaker at some point. The Phantasmal Extraction wouldn't have shown it to me. So I just want to be pressuring their life total enough that they don't have a window to just cast Virtue of Persistence. Which... probably going to get Sunfalled here. That wouldn't end the game, but it wouldn't be good for me. Ooh, it's a Juggernaut. I always wanted a Juggernaut. Okay. That could have been so much worse for me, what happened. So if I play Ruby, animate this, do they die? Oh, I think I screwed up with, I wasn't paying that much attention with my caverns, and I think should not have set them all on Dinosaur. Because I don't think I can't actually go Ruby, animate Restless Ridgeline, attack with the Halfling. I think this is still my best play. Auto Tapper, he did me real dirty. He did me real dirty. Because I should have been hitting them for more damage. Ugh. If they don't have a shoulder or another copy of the One Ring, though, they're actually in a good amount of trouble. I guess they get all... well... if they have Sunfall here, it's okay for them, but the One Ring's going to kill them very quickly, if that's all they have. Another Juggernaut? Just, I have all the Juggernauts. Has anyone ever been this well supplied with Juggernauts? I was, last game actually, even better supplied. So I think had I not screwed up my last turn / got auto-tapped into Oblivion, they would be dying in their upkeep right now. So that's something to be sad or happy about, depending on your perspective. They need a Shielded or a One Ring. They did just draw 5 more cards. So they'll probably be able to come up with it. Can you exile your own One Ring with the pigs? Actually? You can. That's another way out. Which, if you're wondering if that was good for me, it wasn't. Seems pretty hard to imagine a scenario where I win this game. I'm not 100% sure I'm actually dead on board to that attack, but I'm dead enough. Well, that was disappointing. I think I mostly lost that game because of that failing to attack with Ruby situation. Anyway, this is the deck. I hope you enjoyed it if you made it this far in the video. If people have suggestions for how to make it better against Sunfall, Shieldred, Porcine Portent, I'd be open to that, because the deck struggles against Sunfall for sure. Maybe there's something you can do with a third color. I didn't really see anything that seemed particularly appealing. You certainly could do things with Spawning Pod that don't involve the dinosaurs, but I think that, well, maybe Atrax is better to get to at 7 than Etali, but I think that if you're going to go all the way up to 7, you want either Atrax or Etali, which is, I went with Etali, which is kind of where the appeal of the dinosaurs comes in. And, yeah. I continue to think that this deck is both fun and pretty good. That Sunfall matchup notwithstanding. So, hope you liked it, and I'll see you next time.